Okay, welcome everybody. And today I have with me Karina, who would like to talk about and share her experience.
So I have schizoaffective disorder. It's related to schizophrenia, obviously, but with a mood component. I guess the best way of describing it is schizophrenia plus elements of depression.
And a bit more about the experience of this. Could you tell me more about like how this condition affects you in particular?
It's a weird one. I know it's in my genes. I got it from my grandpa on my mum's side. It can be triggered out. Generally, the three top triggers are going to be, like, aside from it being in your genetics, obviously, are going to be drugs, trauma, and assault. Luckily, it's never been triggered by assault in me personally, but I've had it triggered out through trauma. So essentially, when you have too many crises at once and it causes you to be overwhelmed. I have experienced trauma and PTSD before without it triggering a schizophrenic attack. When I go more into my story, you'll understand how it all interrelates and has affected things. My first two episodes were brought about by being around secondhand marijuana smoke, and even doctors, when I tell them that, won't necessarily believe me, but there are links with marijuana and drugs and schizophrenia. Obviously, a lot of people can take marijuana or other drugs and not be affected mentally. Unfortunately, it's in my genes. If I'm around it, it could very likely trigger a schizophrenic attack or a psychosis attack. So I'm like pretty much one hash brownie away from ruining my life.
Sure. And other people that I've known with similar disorders have also expressed that same kind of thing. Like that can be extremely triggering for these kinds of things, and it's this funny thing where so many people see it as a harmless drug, and to many people it can be just all the air quote propaganda we hear, whereas it can be really dangerous. And these days we tend to really brush it off and be like,
Yeah.
oh, whatever, squares.
Yeah.
But it's amazing how little we consider.
Mm.
It might not affect you, but it can be extremely effective to someone
Yeah.
else.
It's like marijuana is pretty much my kryptonite. I'm not addicted. I've never like deliberately tried it myself, but it will bring about an episode. And so because of that, I'm like, when I hear people telling me marijuana is harmless, I'm like, it can be to some people, but it's not to me. I have some friends that don't really know much about my psychosis or schizoaffective disorder. Funnily enough, the people that find out first about what I've gone through is pretty much druggies. Because for my own safety, I have to tell them, look, I can't be around you when you're doing drugs. This is why I'm walking away. It's just not worth an episode. So they're always the first people to find out. Like, I'm not secretive about it. I'm open about it. I'm not hiding it from anyone per se. I'm an open book. If someone asks, I'll answer. Like, I have this policy where I'll tell people I'm dating about it. It's generally like a third date thing. I don't want to put it on them on the first date. But aside from that, I don't outright advertise it, but I'm an open book. But yeah, druggies find out straight away.
I imagine that kind of puts an end to a few relationships there. Could you talk about, and not necessarily romantic relationships, but just when people have to choose between drugs and you, how does that go down?
Okay, no one's had to choose between drugs and me yet. If they do drugs, they'll do it in the shed or they'll do it in the backyard, and I'm not going to join them. I'm happy to catch up with them. I'm happy to chat to them. I'm happy to spend a few hours together and then they go off and do their drugs. I'm not joining them. When they're ready to come back, they can come back. We can keep talking. So it hasn't really affected things. Like, I don't judge people that do drugs. I just know they're very dangerous for me. I know if marijuana has that effect on me, harder drugs are probably going to be even worse. So I just steer clear.
Yeah, cool. And I think that's the most important thing, sort of that not judgmental attitude. Yeah. And so tell me about your work life, and has living with this impacted your work life?
I've essentially been in the health industry for 12 years doing massage and personal training. I've now transitioned out of that. I needed the sea change. I'm just one of those people that gets bored and needs to change jobs. To be fair, I lasted 12 years, so that's pretty good. But I was in the health industry for 12 years. In that time, it's affected my job twice. So I had one time where I was doing corporate massage, which is workplace massage, going over to workplaces and massaging the employees. And I had an episode and I was too chatty. Like, they weren't like, she's crazy or anything like that. They were just thinking, she's too chatty. She could be disruptive. We don't want this overly chatty girl. It's time that we just give you less work, pretty much. So that was the first time it affected me. The second time it affected me was fairly recently. I was working for a women's only gym and I had 2 episodes in my short stint there. I was there for about 6 months, I think. They were all trauma-induced episodes. I was going through a lot. Like, I can share that a bit later, what I was going through. But my boss, she was one of the nicest people I've met. Very genuine, very motherly. I accidentally told her I loved her one time. Like, it just blurted out of my mouth and I'm like, oh, I guess that's true. So whatever. Like, she was just one of those people. I've never said I love you to a boss before. And I said it to her accidentally. And I'm like, you know what? There's some truth to that, whatever. She was incredible. Platonic love. She was incredible. Her words to me, though, were, this is going to plague your life forever. And that sucked to hear someone I respected so much and appreciated so much, someone so loving and generous saying that. That sucked to hear, but I'm like, thank you, but that's not how it is for me. Sometimes when someone tells you something you don't agree with, you just smile and nod and move on. I had that attitude to that. I'm like, sure, think what you want to think. You've only seen part of my story. You haven't seen the full thing.
Yeah, for sure. And so now you mentioned you're moving into
Yeah, sorry, I didn't actually say what I was moving into. I spent the last year and a half studying peer support work. I've finished all of my studies except for my placement, which has been a nightmare to complete. I was hoping to get straight into peer support work. While I was applying for peer support work jobs, I actually got a phone call from someone, my boss from my first job, who said to me, look, you're studying, that's amazing. You don't have much experience yet, but what will give you experience is studying disability support work. And would you consider that? And I hadn't considered it before because I didn't even really think much about it. I didn't really know about it. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. So I followed some advice she gave me about the course that I could do. It's through a group called Total Training Solutions. It was only like $200 thanks to government help. And it got me into a really high-end field where they're always looking for people, where I'm able to use my compassion. I'm able to nurture people and care for people. I have a job with purpose. Like, I've always been someone who got raised to do a job you're passionate about. And more than anything, I'm passionate about helping people. So that's appealed to me a lot. So I started to study disability support work alongside my peer support work studies. And near the end of that, the same lady that told me about the opportunity asked how my studies were going, would I be interested in getting a job? And so I went right for it. I've been working for her for about 4 months now. And I've got 2 other job opportunities in disability support work that have come up from my 4 months experience. So things are looking up, like things are doing really well.
That's awesome. Do you imagine that your experience with schizoaffective disorder is going to influence the way that you go about your support work?
It can help me empathize a bit better. It can help me understand the nature of disability a bit better. It would mainly affect things if I was working in peer support, because in peer support, you're actually helping people who are going through their own mental health journey by inspiring them and encouraging them, talking to them about your own journey, looking into your own resources that you've accessed before that have helped you, seeing if any of them will be applicable to them. You can't say you're a counsellor, but you're the counsellor.
Yeah, sure thing.
You listen to them, you're a friend to them, you're an advocate to them, you're a support, you're giving them referrals and recommendations, which apparently counsellors aren't even like legally allowed to do, but peer support workers can.
Oh, cool.
Or at least when I told my counselor about what I was able to do, she was like, she's been doing counseling for 10 years. Her studies are 10 years away, if you will. But back in those days, you couldn't actually refer people. So it's cool that as peer support workers, we get to refer people.
Yeah, I feel like there is a big shift in the way that as a society we're viewing conditions like this. And we've still got a long way to go, but I feel like there is a bit of a shift towards integration and breaking down these barriers. And I feel like a big part of that is people with the lived experience being able to be in these roles and to share their experience and to share their tools for managing what they're experiencing. I wonder if you'd like to share some of the strategies and the tricks that you use to keep yourself in your A game.
So I have notes for this. Okay, so I know I've done mental health plans before. Generally, you have to do them every time you come out of hospital or institute. Mental health plans do help, as tedious as they may seem at the time. Really reflecting on what your triggers are, how you can stay away from those triggers as much as possible, who your supports are. They're going to change over time. What else? Supports. So know your supports, know your triggers. For me, my biggest sign that I'm going to have an episode is I become a vampire for 7 days to 10 days. So what I mean by that is I have absolutely no sleep for this long period of time, and yet I function fully well. If anything, I probably have like envious amounts of energy. Like I'm not manic or anything like that, but I'm very energized, yet I have no sleep. So if that starts to happen, if I get 3 nights in a row of no sleep, I know that there's a chance an episode may be happening. I can talk to the mental health triage. I can call up hospital. I can tell a friend about what's going on, someone I trust. And I can make sure that if an episode does occur, I'm going to be in hospital for it. I'm going to avoid being around people during a psychosis episode. And I'm going to be getting help, medication, that kind of thing in time. I also have a terrible memory, which I think is due to my mental health issues. And so I rely a lot on alarms, especially for my disability support work. I may have a few different clients, even just in one day. So I need to set alarms for each and every unique day to get me to go off to work and be ready. And that's helped a lot. Like I would have missed work today if I didn't have that alarm. Like I literally would have. So it's so helpful. I do journaling every now and then. There are a few apps that I had recommended to me by a friend with bipolar, which is in a similar family to schizophrenia. And she recommended this app called eMood's Bipolar Tracker, and there's Dailyo. And they're both essentially mood trackers that can help you to look at if you have down days, if you have like excessive amounts of energy, if there are any triggers, that kind of thing. And they've been somewhat helpful at different times of my life. So mental health plans I recommend, apps I recommend, journaling I recommend, self-care I recommend. That's going to look different to every person's going to have different self-care. So work out what works for you. If going to the gym works for you, go to the gym. If you can't stand exercise, that's fine. Find something you can stand. And that's probably how I stay on top of my A game.
Man.
That and avoiding triggers, in case I didn't say that before.
Yeah. And you mentioned before medication. So do you mind talking a bit about the medications you're taking and what your regime is?
So I have a medication called brexpiprazole. I've nicknamed it Brexy because I think it's fun to have a cute little nickname for my medication. It makes it sound less daunting. I was on aripiprazole, which is related to brexpiprazole, but I had way too much weight gain on it. And the doctors unfortunately wouldn't listen to me the whole time about the weight gain. I was gaining about 3-4 kilos a month, which is a lot. And they didn't want to have a bar of changing my medications. The only thing that kind of helped them to eventually change it was when I said, look, I'll go see someone else. That's fine. I don't even care if I have another episode if there's a medication issue that causes it. I just want to be off this medication. It's causing way too much weight gain. And so they eventually wiped their hands of me and gave me back to Eastern Community Mental Health and their team, which has psychiatrists, doctors, etc. They've been amazing. If you're in the eastern suburbs, like, I can't recommend them enough. Like, they're great. They have a great team that's going to look after you really well. I haven't got anything negative to say about what they've done for me.
What kind of obstacles do you face daily?
I wouldn't say there's anything like particularly daily that I face, aside from maybe the memory issues. Let's see. I face maybe the fact that future partners might judge me. I face the fact that there's stigma around it. I face the fact that I have to avoid my triggers. That's easy enough for me. Like, it's pretty easy for me to avoid drugs. I try my best to lead as much of a stress-free life as I can and drama-free life as I can. But obviously, you never know what's going to happen. Trauma could happen at any time, and that is a trigger for me. So I have to just accept that. It's not worth living in fear about it because that's just going to hold me back. So I'm just aware of it.
What do you feel is the most draining and difficult part of?
The fact that I guess during a psychotic episode, I get the weirdest thoughts. Like, it makes no sense. It's completely illogical, but it feels so real to me. Like, a good analogy I can give is when you dream, even though what you dream about, like, generally makes no sense, isn't logical, isn't real, is completely random and silly and ridiculous, during the dream, it feels completely real. That's what a schizophrenic attack is like. You have all these weird thoughts that you wouldn't normally have, but they feel 100% real at the time. Black becomes white, white becomes black. You say things and do things you wouldn't normally do or say, and you can get judged for it too. I guess the best advice I can give to someone wanting to support a schizophrenic is try to not hold on to the things they did during a schizophrenic attack, as hard as that can be. It's not your job to tell them, look, don't you realize you thought this, you said this. They already know they thought and said that. They were there. They don't need you shaming them for it. They're probably already shaming themselves enough. So the best thing you can do is just not haunt them with the things that they've gone through, as difficult as that may be, as personal as some of the things may have felt at the time. Yeah, I mean, if something illegal happened, then probably report it. If that didn't happen, if no one was at risk to their safety, then yeah, I don't know. It's not worth lording it over them. They're already probably, like, anxious enough about it.
Do you see a solution to issues that you're facing?
So I do. I wouldn't be looking into peer support work and looking into encouraging people on their recovery journey, if you will, if I hadn't experienced my own recovery journey. I think what I went through, I've had 2 years now of having no episodes. Before that, I had a period of about 2 years where I had about 3 or 4 hospital admissions, all in a short period of time, essentially because of trauma. I don't think I may be naive. I don't think my life is gonna be that traumatic again for a while, so I don't think I'm gonna have to deal with it for a while. But I could have a schizophrenic attack tomorrow. I could have my next attack in 10 years' time. The first attack, I had about 7 years of no attack afterwards. So it's very random. You can be schizophrenic and lead a fairly normal life. You can be schizophrenic and keep a job. You can be schizophrenic and keep numerous jobs, stay in one field. You can potentially drive. Not every schizophrenic will drive. Some will choose that that's putting too many people at danger. I know that I'm generally in hospital before I'm behind the wheel. For me, I feel safe to drive. After an attack, I'll probably stay away from the car for about a month because I just don't trust my judgment as much. But you can hold a job. You can have stable friendships and relationships and all of that. You can lead a relatively normal life. And I think that probably doesn't get said enough. And then I wanted to say this. So whilst there are criminals who've had schizophrenia that do the bad things they do because of it, a lot, but not all schizophrenics probably aren't as dangerous as media makes us out to be. Being schizophrenic doesn't mean you'll do bad things or be a bad person, even under the influence of a psychotic attack. Not including myself, I've met 3 out schizophrenics, and they're actually really nice, beautiful, loving, loyal people. One runs a dance ministry, one is an artist, one's a writer, also peer support worker. All wouldn't hurt a fly, probably even during an episode. That's controversial to say, because there are dangerous schizophrenics out there, there are sexual deviant schizophrenics out there, but a lot of us aren't actually that dangerous even during an attack. Okay, some of them, you'd never even guess they had an episode unless you saw one of their episodes. So just like there are good and bad people, there are probably a lot of good schizophrenics out there who aren't dangerous even when off their medication. Like, the most dangerous thing I did in all of my attacks was make mum a sausagen coffee. It was terrible. And like, in schizophrenic logic, I was like, she's the Wicked Witch of the West. She's a horrible mum. She deserves horrible coffee. And so I made her horrible coffee. That's as bad as it got. If I tried to attack you, you would probably be 3 steps ahead of me and stop me from attacking you. You know what I mean? That's not all schizophrenics. Unfortunately, there are the dangerous ones out there, but not all schizophrenics are dangerous, is pretty much what I want to relay. So personally, during an episode, you could say I'm more of a kooky weirdo than a dangerous person, but that's me, not everyone. Dangerous schizophrenics do exist, sexual deviant schizophrenics do exist, but not all schizophrenics are dangerous or sexual deviants. Some just temporarily have very abstract thoughts, like in fact all have very abstract thoughts. My history, I have it because my grandpa on my mum's side had it in his genes. It skipped a generation with my mum and brother, but was underlying in me. I had a relatively normal childhood with no real signs of it. I didn't even have imaginary friends when growing up. My grandpa was around in the times when schizophrenia probably wasn't as well diagnosed or treated, and I can guarantee some of his irrational, nonsensical behaviors came from it. In his case, it did manifest with some bad behaviors, what you could even call evil behaviors, but that won't happen with everyone, and arguably, if he grew up in a time where there was better treatment, he possibly wouldn't have even done a lot of the evil things he did, and might have even lived a relatively normal life. I have an auntie with it and a cousin with it. So my auntie has gone decades between episodes, and I believe my cousin has also gone long periods without experiencing it. This cousin, I have a lot of respect for her. She is a peer support worker. She did that before I even thought to do that. She's older than me. She's more along on her journey than I am. I could probably learn a lot from her. It can be long-term, especially if undiagnosed or untreated, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So it doesn't have to plague your life like every month, let's say. Not all schizophrenics hear voices or see things. It may just be delusions, so grandiose ideas, beliefs and feelings, and strongly holding on to thoughts about the world which aren't true. Generally, you need to hear voices, see things, or have delusions to be diagnosed. So you could have one of those things and have schizophrenia, you could have 3 of those things and have schizophrenia. And some of those things are even linked to bipolar, so it can be hard to diagnose. For me personally, it's mainly the grandiose ideas. I've had 2 stints where I heard voices to a degree. It wasn't all the time. One of them I was in the Gold Coast and I thought that my friends were in my head and I could hear them, and to be honest, that was fun. Like, I wouldn't wish schizophrenia on anyone. The other times I haven't heard voices, so it's very much a myth that like all schizophrenics are always going to hear voices, or all schizophrenics are always going to have hallucinations, or all schizophrenics are always going to have grandiose ideas. For me, it's pretty much always going to be the grandiose ideas, but that's me personally. It can be hard to diagnose. I was once diagnosed or misdiagnosed as having bipolar before they changed their diagnosis to schizoaffective. My first ever diagnosis was schizophrenic. I've never deliberately been under the influence of drugs, but I'd say it's like a bad fortnight-long acid trip. As I said before, black becomes white, white becomes black. An example of this is I remember walking along a park yelling to myself about how gay people should just get married so they can fuck up their lives and be miserable like the rest of us. So I'm not anti-gay people at all. I voted yes for marriage equality. I'm one of the most hopeless romantic people you'll meet when it comes to other people, so I'm very supportive of relationships. So the anti-gay thing was very not me. The anti-marriage thing, not me. That's an example of I normally wouldn't think that at all. I wouldn't think any of that at all. But that was very real and very logical at the time for schizophrenic Karina, if you will. My first episode, I was about 21, so it was around 2010. It lasted about a fortnight. There were lingering residual thoughts and feelings for about a year later that I was able to dismiss and not focus on. So if I heard certain songs, they would remind me of the schizophrenic attack because certain songs were playing during the attack, and those songs had a lot of meaning and feeling and emotions behind them. And so if I heard them again, it would bring back those emotions and feelings. But I was able to detach myself from it and realize that was just the psychosis, not reality. Obviously, during the psychotic attack, I couldn't detach myself. But for the 6 months, 12 months later, I could. So you do snap out of it. But I guess if you're undiagnosed and untreated and keep on going to your triggers, you may not snap out of it. You may not get out of that reality, that lack of reality. So I'm fortunate in that I can take a step back from my triggers. I'm fortunate in that I won't have to be plagued by it forever, but some people can be. So my second episode was probably about 7 years after my first. I had full-time relationships in between this time when no signs at all of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder came up. The second episode, I was around 28. It was around 2017. My maths could be terrible. I'm not good with maths. I'm not sure if I can blame my schizophrenia on that. But I was living in a house of pot smokers, and I was finding myself going more and more paranoid. So you could say I was closer to experiencing paranoid schizophrenia. I had a lot going on in my life. My dad died. I was best friends with someone who could potentially be going to jail. I had my long-term relationship break up. I had to move house a few times. So I was emotionally overwhelmed whilst being in an unhealthy living environment that was literally driving me crazy. I was admitted to a Gold Coast hospital in 2017 for about 2-3 weeks with my first ever hospital admission. I made some friends there, I had fun, I got help. It wasn't that bad. I used to have a fear of hospital, and this definitely cured it. So in 2018, I went to Glenside, around 29 years old. I do love the facilities there. They have a art supplies place nearby. There's an outdoor exercise park for when you're allowed outside. They have a little piano there. They have a gym there, a pool table. All of them have pool tables pretty much. Music and art lessons, etc. So I also made some friends there, and if you're institutionalized, it's like a camp. So as much as there may be a lot of shame and frustration when you're going through a psychotic episode and getting help for it, I've actually enjoyed my experiences in hospital. They've been pretty good. Yeah, there's kooky, little fun things that always happen there, and yeah, it's nice. I would recommend hospital to people. My last episode was when I was around 30 years old at the Royal Adelaide. I was let out too early because have learnt to present really well, and that can mean I can get let out early, which sucks because then I just end up going back in, and that's what happened. I was sent to the equivalent of a halfway house for mental health rehabilitation, if you will, called West Intermediate Care Centre. So that probably lasted about 2 to 4 weeks. They had acceptance commitment therapy, mindfulness meditation, and a lot less stimulation than Glenside or the Royal Adelaide. I did find it pretty boring, but it was probably a bit more psychological, very much about different forms of meditation and that kind of stuff, trying to equip you with life skills that you could later use to be less likely to relapse. I also may have not enjoyed it as much as my other stays because I was going through a lot of shame about not being fully recovered. They also did freak me out a little by offering up electric shock therapy, but thankfully they listened to me when I said that I refused to do that, and they do give you a choice in what recovery looks like for you and what therapy will be for you and what medications you can go on. Like, they don't just force you to take one medication. And when they link you up with a mental health team, it's going to be a process where you work out what works best for you. Okay, so my first episode was around 11 years ago. I've been hospitalized or institutionalized 5 times for it altogether in my life. Twice from being around marijuana smoke, secondhand. 3 times while going through rather rare, arguably extraordinary circumstances and trauma. Theoretically, you could therefore say it's the equivalent of it coming up every 2 years, but I know that now that I have mental health teams, medication, doctors looking after me, as well as a lot less stressful circumstances and awareness of my trigger, I can avoid it a lot more, and I can confidently say it shouldn't average popping up every 2 years for the rest of my life. I've lost 2 jobs from it. I've lost 1 friendship group from it. Christian friends who listened to their outspoken leader who was telling everyone who listened that I was crazy. I haven't really missed out on any romantic opportunities because of it. My first episode did estrange me a bit from my mum for a few years, especially because it took me years to address that it had happened and actually explain what happened. And the reason it took me so long was I was so in fear of the fact that my brain was capable of doing that. I was traumatized by the fact that I'd experienced that I didn't want to address it and go back to it. I just wanted to move on. That wasn't healthy. Eventually, I had a conversation with Mum about what happened, and she understood completely, and our relationship became a lot better, improved from where it was. My auntie that has it, she had it in the days where you would get locked up for it. From what I gather, she's had relatively few episodes in life. 1 episode from assault, another episode before marriage, so I guess before a big life event happened. She may have gone 10-15 years without it before. I don't have a journal of that kind of thing. She may have had 5 episodes in her life. It's hard to say. She's now in a nursing home. I say this to say it doesn't have to be full-time, especially when medicated and appropriately looked after. Setting boundaries away from abusive situations if possible. Staying away from drugs and limiting stress in your life. Staying away from trauma and drama as much as possible can help you be less likely to relapse. It's not a life sentence and it doesn't have to plague you for life. It can help to be aware of triggers and warning signs, keep a diary or journal if needed. If you have friends that are struggling to accept what you've gone through, including them in your recovery journey can help. So taking them to doctor's visits and things like that so they can understand it a little bit better can be a good thing. That's what I started doing with Mum, and that's what helped improve things a lot more. I'm personally a Christian. I have seen miracles and answers to prayer and that kind of thing, but ironically, I've probably had less visions than a lot of avid Christians out there. So that's kooky, fun fact. As a Christian, if you have schizophrenia, I think the best thing you can do to look after yourself and others is to take your medication. Medication can be a blessing and a privilege, and you shouldn't be peer pressured into stopping it to test your healing. Be careful who you talk to about it. Even in the church, there can be people who've lived fairly sheltered lives and who won't be able to understand your circumstances at all, or who will give the worst advice you've heard in your life, pretty much. If you tell the wrong people, you run the risk of hearing empty platitudes like, why do you think God gave you this? Or how do you think God is growing you through this? Or do you not have enough faith to receive healing, etc.? Just ignore that. I learned to keep my mouth shut with certain people. You might be lucky and have schizophrenia in your genes, yet never experience it. It can affect people in their teens, but normally comes out between early adult years and 40s. If it hasn't come out by then, it'll probably never come. It can be drawn out or triggered out, as I've said, by abuse, drugs, or trauma, but it's possible you can sometimes experience these things and not have it drawn out. For example, in my 7-year period in between episodes, I did go through trauma to the point of PTSD, and funnily enough, even without being on antipsychotics, I didn't have an episode. So it's very hard to predict. Schizophrenia is like a dream or a worse nightmare. 3 out of 4 schizophrenics I've met that I can think of off the top of my head, I've met more, but 3 out of 4 that I can think of are arty, think outside of the box, pursuing creative jobs, etc. When I was telling my friends that I was going to have this interview, one of my friends recommended that I recommend the Netflix show Spinning Out. Apparently, it's supposed to represent bipolar, but with there being so many links to bipolar and schizophrenia in how they manifest, it could also be a good thing to watch if you're a schizophrenic or if you want to support someone that's schizophrenic, to just see how they present it.
Have you found representation in media that's related to your experience?
This is a bit silly. So my favorite films before I ever had an episode were Donnie Darko and Fight Club.
Awesome movie.
So awesome movies, yes. I look back and I'm like, did I maybe overrelate because a part of me like was schizophrenic? I don't know. Hard to say. But yeah, good movies. They probably don't represent schizophrenia well at all, to be honest.
They represent a lot.
They represent a lot, and I like a lot of the things they represent. Because my friends humanize me and met me before they knew about my schizophrenia, they don't lump me into the schizophrenic category. So they might hold on to prejudice based on episodes they saw in others that they don't yet apply to me. So, for example, I have friends who'd never hypothetically date a schizophrenic, yet they wouldn't friend zone me for it. Or I have friends who believe schizophrenic people in the workplace are too dangerous and so they should stay on the dole for their whole life, just in case, yet I'm supported to work. They're happy for me to work, but they adamantly hold on to the fact that schizophrenics shouldn't hold jobs because they believe schizophrenia is dangerous. I disagree, but it can be dangerous, and I'd be naive to say that it can't be. As I said, black becomes white becomes black. Logic is twisted over its head. So it is possible to justify doing horrible, evil, inhumane things during an episode. I'm just fortunate enough to have not experienced that myself. I'll tell dates about it. I'll tell druggy friends about it. Overall, I'm high functioning enough that I don't owe it to tell anyone, to have to share my story prematurely. Maybe if I were more dangerous, I would, but that's the decision I've decided to make.
Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for sharing all of that. You've pretty much covered all of our talking topic.
Yeah, that's cool. I assume that a lot of your guests won't have as much of a monologue as I had, but I had a whole bunch of notes that I wrote that I wanted to let people know about schizophrenia. If I can help humanize schizophrenia a little bit more, because it is stigmatized and misunderstood, then I've done my part, and that's why I did this interview pretty much. And I didn't want to leave anything out, so I had a lot of notes.
I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. And that's exactly what we're aiming to do here, is to bring out those stories and bring up that awareness as well of all the spectrum of human experience that we're all going through. Try and help us all understand each other. Yeah, thanks, Karina.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.